Howdy guys, gals, and non-binary pals. This is the Tales from the Waystone Summer Reading Program.
We are your hosts, Will and Phoenix. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the third installment of our series on Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot duology, Orange Phase 90 Script Pedal, where we'll be reading chapters 5 and 6 of the first novella, A Psalm for the Wild-Built.
As per usual, a short explanation of the plot. Each week we'll be examining 2 chapters of Monk and Robot duology and figuring out what we can take from the text to apply to our real lives. We also take some time to focus on something we have learned this week, and we will recommend something to you, as well as telling you a notable quotable from the book that made us smile or laugh or think, somewhere in the middle of all of that. Before we begin, let's get some disclaimers out of the way. First of all, we are in no way affiliated with Becky Chambers or her publisher, Tor Books. Second of all, we naturally assume that you have read what we're going to talk about. So it's the first 6 chapters of A Psalm for the Wild-Built. If you haven't, please go read it. Or, I'm not the boss of you, so do whatever you want. Also, word to our community, please be kind to yourselves, one another, and the creators of the worlds that we love exploring.
All right, so let's kick things off with Chapter 5, Remnants. In this bit, we start off with some of Sibling Dex's stubbornness.
Some? A lot.
Sibling Dex is incredibly self-reliant to a fault.
Also, we see where cultural protectiveness can also be infantilizing, or, I don't know, it can be very limiting, or it can be very restrictive to the people you are otherwise trying to empower or protect.
Yeah, it doesn't respect the agency of the other. And
it doesn't respect the agency of the person you are trying to, quote, protect. And I say this, and I think we've recently had some interesting cultural discussions if you've been following The Pit at all. So there's characters that are autistic to varying degrees. And that includes at least one that is in an assisted living situation where she needs to have help with normal everyday functions, but it doesn't mean that she's not a
whole ash
person with thoughts and feelings, desires. And I think what's amazing is that The Pit takes the time to acknowledge that we don't need to infantilize the people who need extra help.
And in the case of Mosscap, this is a being that wants to help of its own volition. And just because in the past its kind were used as essentially unpaid labor, Dex makes some assumptions that, it's not okay for them to ask for help from this person.
There's another example that's kind of rattling around in my head, and I wouldn't mind if you helped me kind of articulate it better.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were growing up back in the 90s, I don't know about you, but I was absolutely drilled that every Black person had to be referred to as African American. Like, having a white person say that another person was a Black person was like offensive or something. Like, it was drilled into my head that you couldn't actually refer to them that way. You had to refer to them as African American, even if they weren't from the United States. Like, even if they didn't live in the United States, it was kind of just drilled in that they're just like, that's the name for Black people. It's the words that you're supposed to use.
Yeah, I remember that, and it was oftentimes brought up in well-meaning ways.
And it's always white people telling other white people that that's what you were supposed to call them. Not Black people having their own agency to be able to tell you what they would like to be called. Especially like, there are people of color everywhere. In fact, actually more everywhere than people that look like me. And like, calling someone African American when they're not from the US, or they're not from even, like, they don't call any part of the Americas home, any of that. Like, that's weird. But like, you get people tripping over their tongues trying to use the right terminology so that they are not offensive, winding up well-meaning and being offensive.
Yeah, and that's, I think, similar to where Sibling Dex is here.
Because robot kind was used for their labor, the thought process that Dex has is that they cannot ask for help or assistance from Mosscap for fear that they are using Mosscap for its labor.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the funny thing, and this is a good analogy that Moscap makes. If Dex needed to reach something from a high shelf and asked a taller friend to reach it for them, would that be wrong? And, Dex is like, well, no. Well, consider me that taller friend, says Moscap.
Right. Moscap is stronger. And in the instance that we're talking about, what has happened is that Dex put too much faith in the engineering of their home, their wagon, because it's not built for being out in the wilderness. It's built for being out on paved roads that are smooth-ish.
That are maintained.
That are maintained. That is yes.
Right now, they're traversing a rough mountain road that had been paved many, many centuries ago, but has since fallen into disrepair. It hasn't been maintained at all.
It's all benign neglect.
Yeah, it's just been sitting out in the elements.
Roots underneath it, animals going across it, sun baking it, rain, wind.
Freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. We've all seen particularly rough patches of roads that go from being perfectly smooth to, after a rough winter and a sudden thaw, filled with massive potholes and things like that.
Anyone ever want to experience this? Go to Spokane, which repaves at least one arterial road every year.
Usually 2 or 3.
Yeah. And also the highway.
Yeah. So obviously over time, it's at the point where this road is littered with sinkholes and potholes and jagged edges and all kinds of hazards.
And if anyone has ever had an experience like what I've had once with potholes, I had a pretty good maintained car that was meant, quote, to be a little more rugged. At least, that was the idea behind the trim line. And I went around a curve, and it turned out that there was a pothole that had wormed its way from the edge into the actual lane, eroding into the white line, going around that curve. So it was like a 4 or 5 inch sudden drop into this hole. Wound up going around it 4 a.m. to go to work, cracked both right rims, shredded both right tires, no longer a functional car. And the ox bike is even less able to deal with all of that because it's basically a little tiny RV, or the ox wagon, I guess. And so the design of this thing has a gray water tank and a freshwater tank, and the freshwater one cracked. And the GIF with the person putting the
magic tape.
Yeah, on the leaking cylinder of water.
That's what I thought of it too.
Yeah. I just have, because it's spraying fresh water everywhere, and quickly Dex is running out of water for this journey. They are going to be at a massive disadvantage of now I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there and back just fine. I'm going to definitely not be able to take a shower ever again.
To say nothing of drinking water.
Exactly. And Moscap is over very fascinated with everything that's happening, which doesn't help Dex's mood. But Dex almost compulsively refuses the help that Moscap wants to give.
A lot of the tasks that Dex is trying to accomplish are the sorts of things that an extra set of hands would be pretty much necessary for. Like patching the tank up with the plumbing tape. They need someone to hold the tank steady and to rip off sections of tape. And it's the sort of thing that having that extra help would mean a lot, regardless of whether that help comes in the form of a robot or a human.
And so it's not just that Dex is feeling awful about asking for help from a robot. It's that Dex is feeling awful about the idea of asking for help at all.
Yeah. As we've discovered, Dex has a large degree of pride. They have a very hard time accepting help, even just accepting that someone else might like them. We also find that Dex is dealing with some other things that have been drilled into their head as well. So Mosscap finds a solution for the missing water. Well, it turns out there is a stream not too far from here, and they can go fill up the gray water tank with that.
And then run it through the filtration system.
And then they have fresh water again.
It's a solution that Dex, in theory, likes, and then in practice gets absolutely squicked the absolute
Fork
out over the idea of algae or little creatures or pollution or whatever, mud, mostly the mud and the algae.
And it's not just that, it's the idea of going off the trail.
It's also the idea of going off the trail in a way that might harm the wildlife. I know that when I've gone on hikes, the idea is do not go off of the trail. Do not traipse through everything. Now, there's a couple of really good reasons for that are related to, like, you don't want to destroy the ecosystem. There are also some very good reasons to not do that, like you don't want bugs going up your pant leg, or ticks, like specifically, or leeches. We may have just watched Stand By Me like last night at the movie theater, and does anyone know if leeches hurt? I assume they hurt.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of latch on.
Right, they bite you.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I think there's also some practical differences between cutting your own trail and following an established one, even if it's a game trail. On an established trail, it's all pretty straightforward. You know exactly where you're going. It's relatively flat. I mean, and you can see this even in, like, I remember in college, there was always sort of the path of desire that led across the quad, where, yeah, there was the paved walkway area, and then there was also this unpaved, unofficial path that just cut directly across. And that was the one that students took every day from the student union building to all the various buildings on campus, because they didn't want to just take the indirect route. They just wanted to have the straight line.
Right. I think that if the indirect route had been efficient, which it's not because it's indirect, that wouldn't have been a problem. I think that that's a failure of the design of the campus.
Yeah, it usually is. But the point is, it was still a path that you could reliably go across. Just enough repetition had passed there. What Dex is worried about here is going completely off the beaten path at all.
Like, not even looking at animal paths, just having to make their own path.
That requires a degree of thought and intentionality that they've never had to have while on nature walks in the past.
They're carefully making their way from one step to another step. They don't want to disturb nature. Like, they have this almost idealized, romanticized thought in their head of how every life, no matter how small, is precious and should be cared for. Which, don't get me wrong, I think that we shouldn't be going out of our way for a wanton destruction of living organisms and creatures. But then Mosscap tells them to steer clear of the badger holes. Is that right?
Weasel holes.
Weasel holes? Not because of the weasels, but because of the apple spiders.
So called because of their size.
That's enough.
Yeah.
And I think it shatters this idea that everything is precious and goes, well, now everything is dangerous.
There's also, I think, the tension that comes with being a part of these ecosystems, or any ecosystem for that matter. At one point, Dex brings up this idea that people and animals in general are motivated by trying to lead safer, more comfortable lives without fear, without, hardship, things like that. And they're not wrong to do that. But at the same time, it can oftentimes have long-term consequences. So they bring up Wynn's paradox, which is a reference to an event where humans did not like the fact that wild dogs in the shrublands made it hard for them to hike and fish and go hunting out in the fields. So they systematically slaughtered all the wild dogs. And basically, the wolves in Yellowstone is really what we're looking at here. And it wasn't that the humans then destroyed the ecosystem. It's that the elk herds that had been held in check by the wild dogs actually destroyed the ecosystem. Because without anything to stop them, without anything that could, keep their numbers in check, that could keep them from going wherever they wanted, they just ate all of the grasslands and then ended up starving themselves because there was not enough grass to feed all of the elk. And it took generations for humans to decide that they needed to actually bring wild dogs back. As much of a threat as they posed to humans and elk alike, they were a necessary part of it all. And I think it kind of speaks to this tendency to look at creatures on the food chain and assign moral value to them. Like the herbivore is a good guy and the carnivore is a bad guy.
I mean, we look at vegetarians and think that they're morally more good.
In at least that one aspect of their life, perhaps. But when we start trying to attach moral value to animals, it ends up actually being pretty destructive. And I guess not so much moral value, but moral qualities. Like saying that the lion is immoral for eating antelopes, even though if the lion wasn't there, the antelopes would basically graze the Serengeti barren and they wouldn't be able to survive. There wouldn't be any more antelopes, even after a period where there was a booming supply of antelopes. A healthy system is not always a comfortable system. Like we see this also where Mosscap takes Dex to the ruins of an old water bottling facility. And, he points out that, it points out that the humans that built this factory that is unsustainable and destructive to the environment did so because they were wanting to avoid discomfort, just like the elk, just like the wild dogs in the situation. And in trying to remove this discomfort and trying to remove this fear of existential problems, they ended up building a system that was unsustainable. I look at that when I think about our day-to-day lives. I mean, we lead comfortable lives for the most part. We aren't seldom worrying about where our next meal comes from. We've got a roof over our heads, and we generally are able to get the things we want. And then at the same time, that can't be sustainable for everyone to have that. So that means that in order to make a more equitable society, something that would actually last, people have to give up stuff. And that's a hard sell. And Dex points out that it's not wrong to feel that way, to feel like, oh, I want subsequent generations to have it easier than I had it. I want to make sure that people can get from point A to B easily. So yes, people will use fossil fuels because it opens up so many opportunities that otherwise simply would not be there. And I think it's a way to understand that, the way our societies are built, we didn't have a choice in. We didn't choose to be born into a contemporary society that relies on the ready availability of rapid transit. Is that necessarily something that's sustainable in the long term? Maybe not. At least not with current generation technologies. But it is the thing that we're in. And it didn't come out of an evil desire or anything. It came out of a desire to have peace and comfort that were not available to prior generations. I think it's kind of an interesting thought experiment. It also allows Dex to sort of break out of a bit of a rut in their thought processes that I'd noticed. So Dex has a very almost deontological resistance to leaving the path, even as they don't want to be with the rest of society. And I think part of what may be going on is that Dex is someone who feels very rigid about things being either black or white. Things are good or they are bad. They are noble or they are not. And, as much as they've been feeling like they were not on the right path. They were on the wrong path when they were down among society. So they were going to go back out into the wilderness. That rebellion that is almost as rigid as the society that they're rebelling against. Moscap is waking them up to maybe that they're going to have to be a little more situational in how they think about these things. They may have to be more flexible and think more maybe about first principles and less about a rigid, almost algorithmic sense of morality.
I find some parts of where Moscap takes Dex to like the bottling facility to be interesting in so far as like it has a strong dislike of this place, a strong like no danger no around going to this place. It has never been here. It has never experienced any of the events that caused the rift between humans and robots and made it so that the robots would leave, right? It's made of components from robots that have been made of components from robots that have been made of components from robots that worked in the factories. But it has not been. Like, it's not from those factories, but it still has an aversion to them. Like little passed down walls of awful.
Well, it's like that whole thing where, like, even if you wipe a hard drive, like do a full magnetic degaussing of it, there's still little fragments of data that may exist, like almost like little ghosts in that hard drive from before the degaussing. Like, I think looking at what's going on with the robots in general, they all have these little bits. They have these fragments in their memories from before their current identities came to be.
Remnants.
And that's a fitting name for the chapter as well, because all of what they're dealing with here are remnants of the past that they didn't choose, but they're still affected by. We have the remnants of the road. We have sort of that remnant fear of dirty water, that even though the filter will totally fix everything and create perfectly drinkable water, it still is something that gives Dex the icks.
We have the remnants of all of society telling Dex, no, don't do, with asking for help from a robot, stepping on a blade of grass that has never had a human foot on it.
Right. Don't go off the path.
Right. And then we also have the remnants of this aversion to the factory.
We also get a little bit of insight into how the robots chose to approach mortality. Because theoretically, the first robots could have just kept repairing themselves ad infinitum and had some sort of functional immortality. But instead, they deliberately chose not to, so that after a robot breaks down, it gets disassembled and its parts get refurbished and then put into a general pool from whence their new robots get built. And so
their descendants.
Moscap is the 5th generation of wild-built robots. And the robots originally made this decision because they wanted to understand more about the natural world. And death and impermanence was a large part of it, and they did not want to exempt themselves from it. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think we can move on to our next chapter, which is Grass Hen with Wilted Greens and Caramelized Onion.
This chapter is kind of a short one, and I think it's also one of the first ones where Dex starts to appreciate Moscap as a friend and companion, and not just an annoyance.
And not something that has to be handled.
Yeah, so Dex is making dinner for themselves.
I'm gonna put this out here. This whole chunk is, for me specifically, because I don't know if it's an allergy, a sensitivity or something, but onions, especially raw onions, make it so that it feels like I can't breathe very well. Almost like I've gone to a different altitude and it's like I can't get a full breath any longer. And so the descriptions about how onions make everything better and all of this stuff, I can have cooked onions, but it makes the raw onion reaction worse over time. And so I don't. I actually do miss having onions in my food. It's not that I've not had any, because you can't absolutely avoid them if you go anywhere. but I've done my best. But the description here of all of the onions and how they're apparently worth it to Dex, even though they're destroying Dex's eyes. And having Mosscap witness this and be confused as to why anyone would torture themselves for such a thing.
This also is a situation where Dex's rules around hospitality get challenged.
To them, it's only polite and actually quite necessary to offer food to a guest, to someone who is coming over to your home or joining you in your pursuits. But Mosscap can't eat. And Mosscap is not bothered by this situation. Mosscap is logical. Mosscap understands it can't eat. So there's no point in offering it food. But Dex has been having a really hard time just accepting what that kind of means. Like accepting that that is okay, that it is not required to provide food to a robot that can't eat it. Like they don't know how to handle this. And so they've been stressing themselves out the entire time over something. They can't put their finger on it until they do. And that is after Mosscap has generously helped prepare food for them, been curious, asked a whole bunch of questions, whatever. Dex sits down to eat this meal and Mosscap is there empty-handed. It just clicks. It's because Mosscap doesn't have a plate of food, because the rules of hospitality have been broken.
I love Dex's workaround on this. I thought it was hilarious.
They make a plate of food and give it to a befuddled Mosscap. Eat their own plate of food and then ask Mosscap if they're going to eat the food that was put in front of them, which they clearly can't.
Well, I'll finish it off.
Right.
I thought it was funny.
Oh, I think it's funny. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's funny.
But it does, I think, speak to that kind of black and white thinking that Dex has had for so long around all these parts of their life. I think Mosscap is such a fascinating character because it challenges all of these things that Dex has just understood to be the way things are.
Mosscap has been challenging Dex's truths.
I think it's that way a lot of times when we are dealing with people who come from cultures that are different from ours. Things that we assume are true and universal may not be universal in the way that we think they are. And maybe the things that we have assumed are always true are actually just expressions of some deeper thing that is held in common by others.
Cultural truths aren't always, in my experience, actual truths.
They're usually constructs. Like, I think that it can be really illuminating to try and understand the culture of someone else and where it comes from and how those values arise, and then do the same to our own.
You said something about those being constructs, and that reminds me of how a lot of people say, well, things like gender roles are constructs. You and I have never fallen into gender roles, like traditional gender roles. I'm more mechanical minded than you. You do a lot of the like cooking in our house. You clean up after yourself, like without being poked and prodded into it. You do the dishes. You are doing a lot of the things that are kind of the domestic stuff that is typically assigned to the AFAB person in the house. I do the laundry because I'll remember to take it out of the wash. Things like that. Like there are reasons that we have systems set up. You do the dishes because the thought of touching half squishy textured was food squicks me out. So I thank you very much for what you do. But like I take care of like the guitar maintenance, which is more mechanical and methodical, but it's also relaxing to me and tedious as crap to you. I'm the one that like builds the furniture, or I've done the lead on reflooring and showing you how to do things. That's how my mind works. That's not how your mind works. But that's not traditional. Like that's like the garage shop should be yours, right? Societally should be yours. And it's more mine. These are things that are kind of these challenges to this idea, this rigid thought of what ought to be. And we've always been like that together. But also like the whole idea of gender as a construct. The fact that our main character in this book, one of our main characters, is non-binary. They're genderless. We don't know what their assigned gender is. Like, we don't know what bits and bobs and whatever they've got, because that doesn't matter. Moscap is genderless and is an it's, which challenges other constructs of you don't call people it. Unless they want you to call them it.
Moscap freely admits to being an object.
Which is challenging a construct. But then also makes Moscap makes Moscap itself a construct.
I think there's oftentimes a tendency to make artificial and construct synonymous with unreal or fake.
Or not a person.
And I think really it's not between real and artificial. It's really more synthetic versus organic. Like, is this something that people have made, or is this something that has evolved over the course of nature?
I would argue that at this point, people did not, or humans did not make Moscap.
No. Humans made the things that made the ancestors of Moscap. And it's no less real for having been constructed. Like, synthetic is not the same as illusory or false. But it does mean that if something has been made, that there's some choices that we can make around how it gets used in ways that maybe otherwise wouldn't be available.
I don't think I followed what you said.
So gender is a construct. It's a real thing. It is no less real for being a construct.
Let's just put it out here. You're a cis male.
Right.
You are a man.
Yeah.
People who have no gender are not telling you that you are not, in fact, male or a man.
Right.
But in the same way that you should not tell me that I am anything if I say that I am nothing.
Right.
Our friends who are trans women are women. They are women because they say they are women. And because they live their life and that is who they are women. Trans men, I don't give half a shit what you dress like. We have a friend who is a guy. It doesn't matter what's in his pants or what his body shape is like. He is a guy because his pronouns are he, him, and he says, I am a man. Cutest, pinkest, like kawaii clothes I have ever seen. And I'm like, you are adorable. And I don't care that that is typically women's clothing that you are wearing. You said you're male. You said you're a guy. You said these things, and I believe you.
And I guess the thing that I'm really getting at is, along all of that, the thing about constructs is that we can choose to use them or not use them however we see fit. We can perform those constructs or not with agency. We have agency over how we interpret those constructs in our own lives.
This is true, but if you deny the other person who is saying, this is my reality, then you're an
asshole. Exactly. Because they have that agency too.
I'm not saying that transphobes don't have agency. I'm just saying they're wrong.
Right. The point I'm making is that people who use the construct of gender differently from how other people choose to, for themselves specifically, that's I think the most important thing. It's self-determination.
Self-agency.
Exactly. Because it is a construct, there's nothing that says you absolutely have to use it in one specific way.
Right. So with non-binary people, you've got people that feel like they're closer to one gender or another gender, or just not a gender. I personally use the term agender because I don't identify with any gender. Like, no. Like, there's not like a mix of genders. There's not like part this and part that. There are also people whose, instead of like, there's male and there's female and there's null, there's like things outside of that. It's not even on that spectrum. They're completely just not there's a different concept. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that, but it's not impossible for them to wrap their minds around it. And that's their reality, and that's their life, and that's their choice. And it is exhausting sometimes as a person to have to explain this to people who are either unable to or refusing to get it, or just accept it and go, hey, I don't understand, but it doesn't matter because it's real for you. And so a lot of people just kind of give up and say I'm non-binary, or just give up and pretend to be the assigned gender that they've been given by societal look at my body and that's what you say that you are. But I like how this book questions certain constructs and just accepts certain other things like non-binary people exist, and that Moscap is still a valid being without being a human or a human analog.
Right. It rejects.
I think I'm going to leave a lot of the he's and, wrong pronouns in with our respective fixings of them, because I think that that's actually a good way to show that you're not going to always be perfect, but you can correct yourself gracefully.
Like, it knows that its experiences don't conform to gender because it's a robot. It doesn't have that construct of masculine or feminine or whatever. It's a robot.
I do find it interesting that you keep referring to it as he. That something about the way that they are presented in this book, the way that it is presented in this book, somehow the way that Moscap is presented in this book makes you think he. And I don't know if that's a societal thing where a lot of genderless things just get defaulted to he, or a lot of unisex things are generally the things that were designed for men.
I always just imagine Moscap's voice being that of Alan Tudyk.
Okay.
That's a large part of it.
Also valid.
And so that kind of short circuits things in my brain a little bit.
That's fair. I have also used the wrong pronouns for Dex, and I've most assuredly used the wrong pronoun for Moscap. I mean, I just did. I used they. But I do think it's interesting that our default doesn't usually drift towards she, especially for things in sci-fi books, especially for things like robots, because we associate, I think, as a culture, robots with masculine things, or robots with boobs to be sex bots.
Robots with secondary sexual characteristics.
Because sometimes they have secondary sexual characteristics that are male-ish. Like the squared off jaw, or that they're constructed to look more masculine.
I think there's also disembodied robots, like computers, oftentimes get feminized.
Depends.
Like the ship's computer for the Enterprise in Star Trek
was given a female voice, yeah, but also we do have a culture of things that get used, get feminized. A lot of people feminize their guitars. It's kind of gross, actually. Feminize their cars, yep. That's a fun thing to unpack. I don't think I want to right now.
Well, why don't we get to notable quotables? It's your turn this week.
That sounds great. I think changing the subject is a fantastic idea right now.
Yeah. We can change the subject.
And we will. All right. Notable quotables. I have a couple of, or three of them. Moscap's face wasn't built for annoyance, but it conveyed the feeling all the same. It's really neat to watch Moscap express things that are like, I am annoyed at you. I am impatient with this thing. I just want to get this over. Just stop putting up roadblocks. Like, I have this, the feeling when someone presents you with a problem and acts like they want you to fix their problem. And then you provide them with some ideas that could possibly help them move past their problem. And they're like, but I don't wanna. And I'm like, then why did you ask me for help?
You mean the Reddit problem?
This is not just a Reddit problem. I've had this in real life. I've had this, this happens, yes, in people just wanting to vent.
And that, I think, actually is something like, a lot of times when people say they want advice, they don't really want someone to tell them how they ought to approach things. They want someone to validate how they feel about the thing and what they want to do about it.
I can't read someone else's mind. I especially can't read somebody else's mind through Reddit, and I am not going to be able to provide them with the answer that they want. I don't like this kind of problem. Anyway, I feel for Moscap. I think there's something beautiful about being lucky enough to witness a thing on its way out. There's another, again, cultural discussion happening because of The Pit. Fantastic show. Totally recommend it. We've already recommended it on things to recommend on this podcast. The ability to die with dignity, by choice, with your own agency. I don't see why that's even a question.
I think it also hints at the beauty of living an ephemeral life. Like, every day is the end of the world as we know it. The world is constantly changing and life is changing, and we get to be witnesses to that change. We get to be a participant in that change.
And I'd say that you do the world a disservice by trying to hold on to it as it is.
Yeah, I think, it's good to be mindful about that impermanence and recognize that that impermanence is not a bug, but a feature. It's part of what makes life life. Like, it's growth, it's change. It's like they say, the moment you're born, you start dying.
The moment something is created is the moment that entropy starts to affect it.
Yeah.
Do you know how many in the last week pictures of absolutely destroyed minifigs I've seen on the Lego subreddit? Either because they were made of the colors that are notoriously brittle, or because someone put an air freshener too close to their Lego or spilled oil or something on it, and they picked it up and it disintegrated. Things that you think are permanent rarely are.
Everything changes state. Like, it disintegrates, it will melt, it will freeze, it will burn, all of these things. All of that stuff happens just over time.
Well, forget anything that's outright destructive in the way that we think of it. Plushies that are well loved. We have a friend who I want to get a hold of their childhood plushie because they want this, not because I want to just change it for them, but they want to bring it back to life. I just want to take the stuffing out, replace it with new stuffing after it's been washed and given some TLC and maybe brushed out so that it's not matted. But they didn't go out of their way to destroy their plushie. They held on to it and loved it. The fur matted. It got dirty. They washed it. The fur matted more. To be loved is to be changed.
To exist is to be changed. Like, there's sort of, I think, in collector spaces, this idea that you can keep your treasured belongings hermetically sealed in this way that they will be completely mint in box forever. And I think in many ways that does a disservice to the thing, because the thing has value to be used.
I will push back a little bit, but not a lot. I think that in my hands, collector's items should be taken out of boxes and enjoyed without packaging. Lego should be built. Vinyl records should be listened to. You should play that really expensive guitar. You should use the items that you have and not hold on to them. They will still decay in the box.
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
But I also am a huge proponent for one other thing. Everyone has the agency to enjoy the thing that they enjoy the way that they enjoy it. So if somebody wants to frame their records or never take them out of the shrink wrap, if somebody just wants a collection of Lego that never gets taken out of its boxes, that's their choice. It's not a choice I would make.
There is sometimes this idea that you can keep something sealed away and keep it brand new, and it will stay brand new forever.
That's absolutely false.
And that's specifically what I'm trying to push back on.
There have been sealed boxes of Lego that get opened up and all of the white pieces are yellow.
Yeah. Like, in the sneaker community, people will talk about getting a dead stock pair of Jordans or whatever that's from the 80s, and they open it up and the shoes fall apart. And that's because they've never been taken out of the box, or they've been shrink wrapped or whatever. And all of the off-gassing that happens decays the glue and rubber. And yeah, these were things that were meant to be worn. And so this idea that you can keep something pristine in its packaging unchanged is a falsehood. And so if you are doing that, you have to understand at that point you are not going to be able to preserve it the way you think you are.
I would say you probably aren't going to be able to preserve it the way that you think you are.
Not indefinitely.
No, especially not indefinitely. Everything decays.
Right.
Some of it decays slower than others. But I do have one more, and it's the one that I actually wanted to talk about the most. But if you don't want to infringe on my agency, let me have agency. We touched on this. We talked about it a little bit. But that statement, if you don't want to infringe on my agency, let me have agency. I know I've brought this back to the trans community a fair amount, but let's be honest, this book also has a trans main character, and I'm on that wibbly wobbly part of the trans community that is agender. There's a lot of discussion about saving children from anything to do with this discussion around being trans, being gay, being, even being ace. These discussions about listening to the person who is actually affected by all of their own
shirt.
For the most part, letting kids transition as children and giving them the agency to choose means social transition. Sometimes it means a delay in puberty, but almost never is surgical intervention. Trans kids are denied their agency a lot, but cis kids with precocious puberty are given the same medication that trans kids could get. It's just a blocker. It's just something to stop their hormones from going too far too fast. Or, there are cis people who get augmentation to their body parts, and that's a gender affirming surgery, but it helps to reaffirm the gender that we all think that they are. Where people who were not given the agency to choose not to go through puberty now have to kind of adjust their body surgically in order to make up for the fact that they weren't given agency beforehand. This is happening a lot. It's not just that, but it's also denying people the agency to choose what is on their valid or once was valid IDs, what bathroom to pee in. Things would be a lot easier if there were some gender neutral bathrooms everywhere. And it could just be a stall, a room, one toilet, one sink room. You don't have to have it be stalls where people are in the same physical space as other people. There's just some other choice to be made that is allowing for others to have agency. And this isn't just about the trans community. This is also about the disabled community, who oftentimes are infantilized or have their agency stripped from them, or have to work within systems that are meant to protect them or provide for them, that ultimately result in them not having agency to do things like get married, because the choice that they are given is to have no money, have no assistance, because if they're legally married, the assistance goes away. But if they stay as two separate individuals who are not in a marriage, they actually can afford to live. There are systems that are put into place that people don't think all the way through. And a lot of it has to do with stripping people's agency away.
Sometimes that agency stripping is an act of trying to control something. Sometimes it's done with the best of intentions, but it's no less harmful for it.
The road to hell and all of that.
And, a lot of times we run into systems that are either poorly designed or poorly implemented.
I'd also say that a lot of the problems come down to not listening to the community that you are trying to serve.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
But that almost vehement insistence on don't strip my agency away in order to protect me reaction that MOSCAP has. I think that needs to be sat with and thought about. Because I think you're right. I think that there are a lot of people that want to make things better, but their desire to make things better manifests in making things worse.
MOSCAP is vehement, but I'd say also gentle in it. It is a gentle but firm rebuke that reminds sibling decks that if they're going to stick by their core principles, which are about respecting the autonomy and the agency of others, they have to accept that even when doing so may make them a little uncomfortable.
Or very uncomfortable. I get how letting another person do the things that they are intent on doing, even if it ultimately harms them, and you can see it from a mile away, I get how that's frustrating and scary. But like, it brings me back to when I got a little clock model kit for your dad for Father's Day or something like that. I'm not sure what it was for. It might have been for his birthday.
I think it was Christmas.
Could be Christmas. And he needed a little bit of help figuring out the instructions. Not that he was in any way dumb about it. It's just more like, hey, I just need to look over the instructions with somebody else and make sure that I have this right. And then I started doing some of the stuff, and he's like, hey, can I do this? You mind not doing it for me? And it kind of broke me out of, oh yeah, that's right. This is yours. And if you break it, or if you do it, quote, wrong, or if, it's not on me that it's not the way I would do it.
I think the other thing to note here is that MOSCAP isn't going to force itself on the situation. Like, it isn't going to force Dex to take its help, but it also wants Dex to understand that if they are making this decision about whether MOSCAP can or should be allowed to help, they need to be taking into account in their decision making specifically what MOSCAP wants in this moment. Like, if MOSCAP wants to help, Dex has the choice to accept that help or not. But they don't get to tell MOSCAP what it wants, or that its desires are not real or in some way meaningful.
Or that its desire to help is a bad thing.
Right. They don't get to tell MOSCAP how to feel about it. They don't get to tell MOSCAP that it shouldn't feel a way, one kind of way or another.
Or that it shouldn't be allowed to offer help.
Right. So if sibling Dex wants to deny the offer of help, they have to do it on their own terms and be honest about that. They need to be able to say, I want to do this on my own because of my own feelings. It is not about what I think about you. They have that choice, right? They have the ability to say, no, I want to do this myself.
I pull wagon.
And again, if we're respecting agency, we've got to respect that. However, that agency can sometimes lead into a situation where maybe they're overstepping where the bounds of their agency actually are and making assumptions about somebody else's agency without respecting what they're actually telling them. So, yeah, I think you picked a good one.
Thank you.
All right. So now let's go about what we learned this week.
What did you learn this week?
So I started learning how to play Dance Macabre by Ghost on the guitar.
Yay! So did I.
Yeah, I'm playing the rhythm part so far, and it's a lot of fun power chords. I find it to be a fun song to play, and it's not too difficult. And after spending the last several months powering through Sad But True, it's a good change of pace.
I agree. I am doing my best to try to hold my attention on something that is easy.
I getcha.
That in itself is a fun challenge for me.
Yeah. Well, and then you can start focusing on trying to get beyond just understanding it to actually mastering it.
Yeah, but also, hopefully, successfully doing a solo.
Yeah.
That would be great.
That would.
Is it my turn to recommend something now?
Yes, it is.
All right. I'm going to be on a bandwagon thing. Project Hail Mary. We saw the movie. It's amazing. I needed to pee like an hour into it, and it was a 2.5 hour movie, and I didn't go.
Congratulations.
I didn't leave because it was compelling and a really well done movie. You read the book. I am still in brain frazzle mode where I don't know about whether or not I'm going to be reading things. But I have also heard that the audiobook is amazing. And so, you know what? I'm going to lean into that. If I can't sit down and read the book, it's not a failure on my part. It's an opportunity for me to augment my time of listening to Critical Role, which has just gotten to the point in my watch of The Mighty Nine where it is the first episode of 2020 and I am just cringing the whole time that they're like, hey, here's all of our plans for the year. And I'm like, oh.
Sweet summer child.
Yeah, sweet summer children. But I digress. Project Hail Mary, very good movie. I didn't know a whole lot going into it. And I find that things that are adaptations of books, I have more enjoyment if it's not something that I have a whole lot of pre-knowledge of.
Yeah, you went in relatively cold.
Very cold.
As someone who read the book, I can say that it did a really good job of adapting the source material. It omitted a few things, obviously, and I can get why, because
In the weeds?
well, yeah, in the weeds, and also you got a finite amount of time to tell things.
Apparently there was a 4-hour plus cut of the movie, and no.
Yeah, that would have been a bit much.
Editing.
Yeah. And at the same time, the stuff that they chose to emphasize, I think they did a really smart job at doing. Like, it takes place in a world that's fairly consistent about the science of how things work. But the heart of the movie is really about the character relationships. And I thought they did a really good job of showing us who these people were and helping us to get to an understanding of them. And it turns into a hangout movie in many ways, where part of the joy is seeing friendships form and seeing smart people work together to solve problems. It's competency porn.
I do enjoy me some competency porn.
Me too. I'm a sucker for it.
Like, nobody is treated like they are stupid, even if they are not conventionally well behaved.
The other thing is that in order for someone to be shown to be smart, someone else is not humiliated.
Right. That is.
So the way you know someone is smart is when you explain an idea to them, they listen to it and say, ooh, and then that means maybe we can also do this.
You got a lot of yes anding instead of my big problem. It happens a lot with trying to show that a woman is smart is that you have to show that a man is stupid. And in this particular instance, you do not have any of that. You do have women in very smart roles who are portrayed as intelligent beings. You have someone who is clearly neurodivergent as a main character, who is not treated like they're not infantilized for being, I would say, probably ADHD, if not ADHD.
I recognize a lot of ADHD tendencies in the main character. And, at the same time, I was like, that's a lot of my experience. And I think they did a really good job of, again, humanizing all of these characters, giving all of the characters fun things to do. There are no villains and there are no bullies.
They also subverted some tropes. I'm not going to say what, just in case you haven't seen the movie, but narrative tropes that I was anticipating, like having to go to doesthedogdie.com. But like the way that they subverted those narratives that make you go, but this is the way that stories are always told, but this is not the way we want the story to be told. It has a lot of that fan service of this is the way I wanted the story to be told.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed that. It was, I think, all the better for it.
I think it's a movie about ingenuity and friendship and loyalty and
Heart
and courage. And yeah, I think it's worth watching. I think it is worth reading. So yeah, check it out. I think it's a good recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for potting with me.
Before we do that, I also want to say that I recommend watching movies that maybe you've seen 1,000 times, or in my case, have seen bits and pieces because TftWS played it all the time and I never saw it in order until last night. But movies like when they bring them back to the theaters, like Stand By Me, they brought back to the theaters. The Studio Ghibli movies get brought back to theaters every once in a while. And I absolutely think that there is something special about seeing a movie that you've either seen a lot or that you're very familiar with, but maybe you haven't really seen. And taking the time to sit and watch in a way that you can't have your phone out unless you're a trash human being, and you shouldn't do that. Anyway.
There is something to be said for seeing a film uninterrupted.
Yeah, but seriously, I'd seen all of Stand By Me. It just wasn't in order. And it was many, many moons ago.
Also a good recommendation.
Thank you very much.
With that, I'd like to thank you for potting with me.
Thank you for potting with me.
And thanks for listening to Tales from the Waystone. Join us next time as we cover chapters 7 and 8 of A Psalm for the Wild Build.
It's the last 2 chapters of this particular book, and then we move on to the next one.
A Prayer for the Crown Shy.
We would like to thank our friend Shawnee Jing for our theme music.
And many thanks to Becky Chambers for creating this universe that we're enjoying exploring.
Audio production and editing, courtesy of me, Phoenix McCullough.
And writing and project management, courtesy of me, Will McCullough.
If you would like to help support us and have the means to do so, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/waystonepod. But really, we'd just rather you come and join us on our Discord and say hi.
Link in the show notes.
And with that, here's one more day above the roses.
To one more day above the roses.
Ding! You know you're a professional when you have to displace dragons off of your couch in order to record.